I've started to use MCP for pretty much everything. Start with a set of base servers, then enable that as a building block so that you can start putting together workflows that use those servers to actually solve real problems for you. The question is now, if you're connecting a client to a server and that server is now connecting to resources that require further authentication, authorization, how do you handle that, right? But you're also nervous because you've been around long enough that you know that writing secrets into JSON files creates risk for you as a human being. You would be borderline crazy having an API key to a production system accessible to a stochastic agent. There's a set of things that need to be done to just not shoot yourself in the foot.
Is MCP secure? As MCP proliferates across the AI ecosystem and even starts making its way into production, we want to make sure it's done in a safe and reliable manner. We've seen the demos. A malicious MCP server can exfiltrate data and create backdoors. And as more people are vibe coding up these servers, we want to make sure that we look at our tools and make sure that they're hardened and secure. So in episode 51 of Tool Use, brought to you by StackLok, we're joined by Craig McLuckie, the co-creator of Kubernetes, the former CEO of Heptio, and the current leader of StackLok, who's developed ToolHive. We're going to be discussing why security matters with MCP, how to make your MCP servers more secure, best practices, things to look out for. And we're going to get into the developer experience and community-driven business. It's a great conversation, and I'm thrilled to introduce Craig McLuckie.
Yeah, I think MCP is a really interesting technology. And the kind of hint here is in the P, the protocol. And, for me, as I was thinking about the world at large, like I became fascinated by transformers, right? These stochastic systems that are able to do things that we've never been able to do in technology before, right? Like there's the ability to start dealing with semantic reasoning and the ability to start processing data, actually driving outcomes. It's just a fascinating plus of system. And then you look at the outside world and it's kind of hard, cruel, and uncaring, right? Like the traditional IT systems are very unforgiving. And I think when I think about what MCP is, it's really a bridge between these two worlds. It's a way for a large language model, which is optimized to converse in natural language. It just happens to be very good at producing well-structured JSON, just start interfacing with these adjacent systems in a way that's natural to that environment. So being able to start looking at an outside world instead of a set of APIs that have to be called sequentially, which creates opportunities for hallucination to start, overwhelming systems, which creates a system where unnecessary context is being egressed from these systems that starts to affect the self-attention mechanisms of transformers. Having that very natural bridge where you can start to describe in a very precise way the specific set of resources, tools, prompts, completions, whatever you have that are necessary to bring that context, from the outside world into the model and create an elegant bridge where those models can start actually interacting with the outside world to control things through a much more natural framework that's more optimized for the way that models work is very compelling.
Yeah, I had someone kind of frame my mental model where instead of an API when you're getting like a singular piece of data, with MCP, you kind of go for workflows, try to get a general goal accomplished or something that augments more than just like mapping a one-to-one MCP function with an API endpoint. So bringing ToolHive into this, what is the problem that you're solving? Where does it fit into this ecosystem?
If you think about MCP as basically a protocol that enables you to describe tools and all the rest of it in a way that's more natural for language models, having a set of curated base servers that you can start to use is really useful, right? So right now it's a very chaotic world out there. Everyone is sort of energized. MCP demos really well. So, a developer is one hot coding afternoon away from producing a server that does something really novel. They get it out there. It gets a fair bit of traction. People look at it and they're like, hey, shoo, wow, this is great. They put GitHub stars on it. And it's very difficult to discern signal from noise in the ecosystem. It's really hard for a developer to know, hey, this was, something that's, people have talked about and read it a fair bit, but it was a hot coding weekend for a developer who's not necessarily committed to the sort of maintenance of this thing other than it's a cool demo. Versus, there's teams out there that are spending a lot of time reasoning about how to map the APIs into a set of tools that can be, or skills that can be consumed by an organization. And so as a starting point, just taking a lot of the guesswork out of, hey, is this a good server? Like if I have to pick between the sort of 50 servers that provide me access to basic fetch capabilities, what's actually going to run well for me? What's going to have a decent kind of profile from a memory management perspective? What's not going to be super flaky when I actually go from that, hey, I'm using this I'm NPX installing this and it seems to work well for me while I'm coding, to, hey, I actually want to build a system that uses this over time to access information that my organization is really sensitive about. And so, yeah, start with a set of base servers, then enable that as a building block so that you can start, putting together workflows that use those servers to actually solve real problems for you. Solve real problems for you when you're trying to code inside the developer inner loop, and solve real problems as you're starting to build agentic systems that address that outer loop where you want to be able to sustainably create access to those classes of systems that your organization is living with every day, and that are potentially under regulatory scrutiny or have a lot of other kind of hardening requirements for access.
Yeah, and I've admittedly mostly viewed MCP as a tool for my development. It allows me to have a common interface that I've been using for a while, Cursor, Claude Desktop, and just be able to input more context into it. But the idea of having it be a part of a production system is almost beyond the scope of what I've explored with MCP, just because I build the final app. Like, I'm okay doing all these different aspects. But how does the idea of a ToolHive Docker container being deployed into a production system help developers out?
Yeah, so there's two sides to it, right? And this is the thing that's relatively complex, because we're using MCPs to help us work. And then we're using, increasingly we started to use MCP in the things that we produce that are the work product, right? So it's both the tool that, like, man is a tool using creature, like we shape our tools, our tools shape us. There's a lot of kind of great quotes that go into this space. And so that journey from, okay, I want to use MCP right now because I'm a knowledge worker. Like, developers are knowledge workers, and there's a lot of other class of knowledge workers out there. And so I want to be able to introduce this as a technology that enables me to do my work on a day-to-day basis. And the reality is, like, in an organization, there are teams that are dedicated to supporting their knowledge workers. There's teams that are dedicated to making developers productive. That's the same team that probably went and procured your Cursor license in the first place so that you can do your work. That team is motivated by your success, and that team wants you to have access to the best tools out there. But that team also knows that maybe if you're in a bank NPX installing something on your desktop, it's not the best idea. So the starting point for us with ToolHive is embracing that situation. You're a developer, you want to use this thing, you maybe can't because your organization won't let you. Or you're a developer, you want to use this thing, but you're also nervous because you've been around long enough that you know that writing secrets into JSON files creates risk for you as a human being. There's very real risk for you as a human being. So the starting point of just, let's have a system, when we look at it as people that have been around for a little while, gives you that experience, but also gives you the assurances that you're not going to get hurt while you're using it, is a great starting point. And then over time, that transitions from, okay, like, I'm using these servers locally, but my organization wants me to be able to access documentation that's in a specific repo. My organization wants me to be able to access knowledge that's not necessarily something that I want an empowered agent to just be able to do direct line of connection to. So this move from servers being a local concept, which is just, I'm running them, as part of my day-to-day workflow, to servers being the bridge between the information that an enterprise has that is necessary to enable me to do my job, in that sort of developer in a loop, and then ultimately supporting other knowledge workers with access becomes really important. Most of the world's monetizable information exists behind a firewall of some kind, right? Like, it's most of the world's not monetizable information has authentication authorization requirements. So being able to bring that information into your workflow requires a certain amount of respect for the sort of access to that information. And it should involve a certain amount of controls associated with it. Just being able to scope this to access only that, being able to make sure that the authorization flow works reasonably well, being able to observe what information is actually being egressed from those systems into your environment. And so I think it's a very natural world where, yes, MCP servers started as that developer tool for just developer productivity. They're going to become a tool that support knowledge workers over time because those knowledge workers need access to their own information. It becomes a way for an organization to control their destiny and say, these are the set of systems I want to have access by these people or these agents that are doing work just like developers. And over time, it's going to become a natural part of the way that SaaS providers who've been delivering these vertically integrated experiences start to deliver value into an AI-enabled ecosystem.
If you've been watching the show for a bit, you know that one of the big benefits to AI agents is the productivity gains. Now, the demos are cool, they're a lot of fun, I've made a few myself, but to get real world benefits, you need to give it access to real data via MCP, and that's a little bit scary. So that's why I've been using ToolHive. ToolHive makes it simple and secure to use MCP. It includes a registry of trust MCP servers. It lets me containerize any server with a single command. I can install in a client in seconds, and secret protection and network isolation are built in. So you can try ToolHive as well. Highly recommend you check it out. It's free, it's open source. You can install it today, and you can learn more at toolhive.dev. Now back to the conversation with Craig.
I think part of it is just making sure you don't stumble over, poor quality tools. I think, one of the things that I've certainly observed is there's a very rich ecosystem of tools out there, and some of them are, more or less stable. And so part of your work as a developer is, hey, I want to be able to use a tool to access something off the local file system, or I want to have a tool that accesses something off the internet, or I want to integrate with some other popular technology, GitHub or what have you. And there's a sort of abundance of choices available out there. You can go and find, a bunch of random servers, you can npx install them. And it's up to you to figure out, how well do they work? It's up to you to discover that, hey, once I've actually gone down the process of getting this tool working for my particular workflow, that, hey, maybe memory management isn't a priority for the tool developer, and this thing is a bit of a memory hog, or hey, there's we encounter, occasional flakiness, for the tool in certain situations. So I think there's a lot of value to just having a relatively standardized toolkit of commonly used tools that are hardened. They actually work reasonably consistently well. They're thoughtfully put together. And so we are working to take a lot of the challenges associated with hitting those kind of pre-production issues that you might have with tool calling. So just giving you a standardized set of tools. We know they work well. We provide a simple way to kind of actually get those tools integrated into the environments that you're using. If you're using Copilot or Cursor or whatever tools that are supporting the tool calling ecosystem. And I think our advantage is just not having to think about it. Like, hey, I can discover them. These are tools that have been appropriately vetted. I'm not going to catch a disease by using this tool because the team has actually taken the time to review them, scan them, make sure that they're packaged well. There's not a lot of, there's no vulnerabilities in the base images, et cetera. So I do think there are advantages to developers as well. It's not just about enterprise use.
In my day-to-day development workflow, I'm getting better using MCPs, but I had the hesitation at first because it exposes my personal data, especially like I said, the file system and other use cases like that. But there's a bit of friction when I set it up, trying to like go through Cursor or even Claude Desktop. If you want to add a new one, you have to update the config file. So this ability of discoverability, I think, is a massive win. Do you focus around the developer experience in how you set the product roadmap, or what's guiding the development flow of ToolHive?
The community. I mean, to be honest, like our principal focus right now is working with the community. So, as the community is looking at real world use cases, we look to within the community to understand what problems they're facing right now in terms of being able to, identify and access these tools, tune the tools for specific use cases, make sure that, based on their own needs, things like, authentication and authorization is a real problem when you're trying to, actually use these tools, not just for local experimentation, but potentially for agentic, use cases. And so I think the intent here is to make sure that it's very, kind of community led. The way I tend to describe this is I think there's a lot of folks out there that are, describing the Emerald City from the Wizard of Oz. And developers are just trying to walk along the yellow brick road right now. And so most of the motivation for what we do and most of the roadmap is coming from real developers out there that are looking to consume tools for their kind of local development experience, but also increasingly looking to use tools as part of the systems that they're building. And as you go from that use of tools for, hey, I'm using Cursor and I want to be able to access things, that's great. But when you're starting to get to a point where, hey, I'm building an agentic system and I want to be able to use tools that enable me to use the Anthropic model with some other data that I have in a SQLite database and this other thing. Um, there's a real need for just having a very simplistic experience to be able to acquire those tools for that developer inner loop, so that, when you're actually working to build that experience locally, you can identify the right tool, you can get it integrated into your developer environment, you can start to kick the tires and get things going. But then when it comes time for you to actually deploy that thing that you've built, that agentic system, we're right there with you to make sure that those tools are now available in something like a Kubernetes environment where you might be deploying your application into. So when you're starting to think about that outer loop of development, you have a similar experience in terms of being able to get that system integrated and also deal with the real world implications of things like authentication, authorization, secrets management, and all of the other things that are necessary to actually make that tool usable in a production context.
And that's a great point for developer velocity. If you can just take a existing tool and plug it into your system, especially through Docker communication and Kubernetes, it just will expedite the process. Plus, you get that almost that reassurance that you don't have to worry about all of the nitty gritty that your team has already put together. Just in terms of the community, how can people get involved? Where do they go? If someone has an MCP server that they've been using that they feel is integral to their product, but they're just not confident it can be deployed to production, how do they bring that to StackLok and have the team trying to work together to make it into something more robust?
So the process for kind of adding to our registry is pretty well defined. So what we've done is basically described a set of criteria for things that we would consider appropriate for introduction into the general ToolHive registry. So if you're like, let's say you're out there and you're working on something and you've built a really cool server and you think that this is something that unlocks real value in the world, the way you would kind of get that added is just submit a PR requesting us to add that to the registry that we've produced. And, we'll then take that PR, we'll run that tool through our set of internal sort of processes to make sure that it is meeting the standards, so that it sort of is achieving and demonstrating the set of things that we think that our community needs. And if it doesn't, well, we're happy to go back and forth with you and work with you to get it to the point where it actually does. And so the intent is to make the sort of public registry something that is kind of community owned, and the community has high levels of ownership around it. So if you have like a cool MCP server, talk to us about it, and we'll work with you to make sure that the base image that we're packaging is appropriate. We'll actually package it for you, and we'll work to make sure that all of the sort of security considerations are in place so that it can be published to that registry. But it's also important to recognize that it's not just about our registry, right? Like, we have a certain opinion around which MCP servers are great. But we also see a lot of organizations or developers or other people wanting to start to create their own registries. And so it's entirely possible to say, hey, these are the set of servers that I want to use for myself. I have a GCR registry here. I've populated it. Let's just use those servers. And you could take a subset of the servers that we've published and publish them to your own registry. Or you could just, make your own criteria up and decide how you want to control that. So we're trying to create that sort of flexibility, starting with a really well-curated set of servers that you can just rely on and trust, but also making it, options available, either being able to run a server directly in a container. So you don't actually have to go through the whole packaging thing. You just get to benefit from the use of a container as an air-gapped environment to run an NPX installed server on. Or, for a lot of the real world use, the more enterprise use, people typically want to have their own registry. They want to be able to apply their own criteria for what makes sense for their organization. And so they can take a lot of what we've done and then populate those into their own registry, or they can introduce the servers that they built for themselves for their organization into that environment.
And do you have any general advice for people to get up to that standard? So maybe there's a little less back and forth, almost like a checklist of things that they can audit on their own servers to get a bit more robust. And even if they don't go the StackLok route, just by being able to be a little more confident that what they're making is secure?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, right? Like the starting point, I think, is kind of community viability. And what we obviously look for when we want to recommend a server is, is there an organization behind it, or at least a set of individuals, right? So there's always that sort of single individual risk, like, hey, here's a cool server, but it's only got one human being supporting it, only one human being maintaining it. We've never seen any external kind of participation engagement. We don't necessarily have a strong sense of this going to exist in a year from now, for instance. If you're looking to use a server, and that doesn't really matter as much for your own kind of like, hey, I'm using servers through the lens of Cursor and I just want to access things so I can produce better code. You can have a chance to use what you want. But if the answer is, hey, I'm using the server to access relational data into an agentic system that I'm going to be supporting for the next 3 years, you probably don't want to trade out that server somewhere down the line. And so that starting point around just, community viability. GitHub stars is a heuristic that a lot of folks have used, but we tend to prefer looking at participation. We value looking at things like how are issues being dealt with? What's the rate at which a community is burning through the issues? What level of engagement do they have with their own community is the type of criteria that we're looking for. And then obviously there's a lot of the mechanics of just using the tools that exist right now to start, scanning for malicious code, making sure that, kind of coding standards are being upheld, that the server itself is not, pulling in additional dependencies that are potentially problematic, that don't have, kind of cohesive security around. So it's kind of trying to look at that holistic picture. And yeah, so my sort of advice would be just treat it the same way you would treat any other package, and ask the question like, would I include this package in an application I'm building? Would I include this application in a package that I'm going to live with for a while, and start to apply the same criteria? And we're looking to just bring a lot of our perspective that came from the world of supply chain security to the MCP ecosystem. But it's a lot broader than that, right? Like it's not just about is the server good or bad? Is the server safe or not safe? It's also about, can I make the server, work well in my environment? Can I actually use the server with a halfway sensible authentication authorization system? That's the type of consideration that we think a lot about.
And you just mentioned something about gauging the I don't want to say long-term viability, but having some staying power. With things changing so quickly, and in your experience with Kubernetes, being able to understand the importance of good infrastructure for expanding out, do you see current gaps in the AI ecosystem for infrastructure? Is MCP being just a protocol going to be sufficient to kind of help elevate agents to become a bigger part of day-to-day life? Or do you think there's other avenues that we as a community still haven't explored enough yet, so we get this robust infrastructure to really start accelerating deployment of agents?
I think there's kind of different horizons that this exists on, right? Like there's this kind of, in my mind at least, there's like, how are we using these tools in our day-to-day work just to produce code? And the work product that's being produced is the code. And then, how are we using these tools to produce agents where the work product isn't just code, it's code plus a model plus a context retrieval subsystem plus all of those other pieces. And the problems, exist in a variety of different ways. Like there's an obvious challenge associated with authentication and authorization that we're dealing with right now, right? Like, so, as we're working in the MCP ecosystem, I think there's a lot of progress that's been made towards authentication between a client and a server. And if you think about like the OAuth workflow to do, simple client to server connectivity, it's relatively solidified, right? Like, hey, we know how to run OAuth flows between a client and server. The question is now, if you're connecting a client to a server and that server is now connecting to resources that require further authentication authorization, how do you handle that, right? Like, do you want to do a chained OAuth with workflow? Do you want to use a JWT token exchange? Like what's the right sort of system to support that? Especially when you think about the incredibly complex world of authentication authorization on the back end. So I think there's obviously a lot more work to be done around authentication authorization. Something has to exist that sits between, a classic OpenID principle, a human being, and a relatively traditional service account, which enables you to take a set of claims that a person might have, propagate that are just a subset of those claims, and then present them to an agentic system so that it can operate on the behalf of an individual for the duration of the task, and then have that access rescinded over time, right? So that authentication authorization flow is something that is interesting. Lots of great work being done in the MCP community. We see a lot of great proposals that are flowing by, and we're certainly spending a lot of time, talking to folks and thinking about what those options are for real world use. The other problem associated with that is just the shape of agents, particularly, and the problems that are associated with if you have an agent that you have provided access to a relatively large set of data, so, hey, I've got an agent that's gone off and indexed all of my Google Drive. I want to create a Glean-like experience. How do I preserve authorization through that flow? How do I avoid a confused deputy situation so that that agent is not inadvertently leaking privileged information to my organization that that shouldn't be dealing with? So it's not just about authentication, but there are some really gnarly and complex authorization tasks that need to happen. The other thing that I see a lot of kind of interest in around progressive thinking, forward thinking people is establishing and understanding the provenance of data, right? Like if you're in a real world situation and you have, some kind of monetizable database, like, hey, I'm, these are my positions as a hedge fund, right? Like if these leaked, this would be really problematic. You may want to be able to run agentic systems that, can start to kind of reason about some of those positions and start to, look for unique insights, beyond what a human analyst could perform. But you need to be able to establish provenance. You need to know exactly which systems are accessing which data when. You need to be able to track the flow of data into and through these agentic systems and understand where it's being propagated to. So I'd say that ability to understand and reason about the flow of information through agentic systems and being able to establish that breadcrumb trail of what's using what is kind of it's very progressive and sort of and interesting. And then in terms of like the sort of nearer term stuff, there's a lot of prosaic things that just need to be wired in. Like, hey, I'm building this thing. How do I wire it into OpenTelemetry? What does an appropriate dashboard look like? How do I deal with throttling so I don't get an insane Anthropic bill on the back of the week because the model's chatting to these tools and they're just dumping in ornaments of context into the context window and blowing up my inferencing costs. So those sort of relatively prosaic illities are another thing that need to exist for sustainable use of agentic systems that are accessing real world subsystems and are being kind of trusted to run in a relatively autonomous way.
I would like to kind of double click on the trust aspect. When you mentioned the ability to kind of observe the data flow, tracing comes to mind, being able to actually see how agents perform tasks along the way so you can debug faster, but also helps just produce visibility. A lot of people view AI as a black box. One thing that ToolHive does is secret protection and network isolation. How do those, which tend to be removed from the end user of these projects, help with trust? Is it just going to be the developer can claim that they're creating products that only allow access to certain data? Or is there any way we can kind of percolate up the issue of a trustful system, a trustworthy system that tools like ToolHive will actually help contribute to?
There's the sort of prosaic and the sublime kind of components of this, right? Like the prosaic components of this are, you would be borderline crazy having an API key to a production system accessible to a stochastic agent, right? Like let's face it, these agents are they don't have a conscience. They don't have like intrinsic awareness, right? Like the constraints are precisely the constraints that you place upon them. And so there's a set of things that, need to be done to just not shoot yourself in the foot. And, one of the things that I would suggest you should probably not do to not shoot yourself in the foot is to, write secrets into JSON files that are readable by these agentic systems that are egressing that content to the cloud. And in some cases, if you don't know what if you don't know what you're dealing with, like, hey, I'm using OpenRouter, I want to try this new model. I don't know who's behind that model. Like, I don't know what they're doing with that data. I sure don't want my API keys being egressed to that model accidentally as part of a code indexing activity. Like, who knows if they're going to get retrained on? Who knows who's behind that model, right? Like, there's a lot of these systems that are suddenly just immediately made available to you. So I think there's just that sort of the mundane, which is just let's just make sure that we are taking care of a set of things that will avoid us getting hurt, kind of over time and in the future. And then when we talk about this sort of the sublime, like where we can get to over time, there's a lot of techniques that we've built over time to start to assert trust in certain environments, right? So the ability to say, I only want to run servers that my organization signed, and my organization's only going to sign these servers using something like a SIG store key if they meet a certain set of operating criteria. And you can start to, establish kind of tiers of trust. So like, these are the sets of servers that are hardened enough for me to use in this environment. And when I say hardened, it's not just about hey, the image is hardened. It's also about hardening the constraints. So basically being able to package up a server, say the server is signed, here's the explicit profile associated with the server that my organization is willing to adopt. So, hey, the server has access to file system, but when I'm running the server, it can only mount this subset of the file system locally so that it can access it. Hey, the system is accessing resources on my intranet. It can only access, these resources on this subnet or in this domain or, at this kind of HTTP endpoint. And being able to kind of bundle up a server along with the constraints and then create a system that can deterministically enforce that server is running with those constraints, and like only servers running with those constraints can be connected to these clients. So there's this long journey from, let's not be silly and get hurt by having secrets egress to models because we're writing API keys into JSON files to, hey, let's actually look at what it takes to kind of create a much more sort of sophisticated real world use so that we can get the constraints in place that enable us to trust these agents enough to actually start reasoning about our data.
Very much on board with the idea of whitelisting, scoping, putting guardrails on the capabilities of these things. One idea, then just curious about your thoughts of the future on it. Do you think API keys are going to stick around? It feels like a massive vulnerability. And I'm unsure if we can use something like public-private key pairs with the mass public just because of the complexity of setting it up. But do you think API keys are going to hang around, or do you think we're going to need better systems now that we're trying to just feed so much data to a system that a single string of characters can cause such catastrophic damage?
I've been in IT for a long time, and unfortunately, these things are fantastically, unbelievably durable. Because, and this is the sad truth, like why does the mainframe still exist? Like if you think about it from that perspective. And the sad truth is, I think for progressive new systems, we'll get to the point where you have agentic identity as a first class thing, right? We'll move away from the world where you are, dealing with directed access through an API key to, reasoning with like an identity provider, an IDP that's able to start carving out identities. You'll start to have systems that look a lot more like that sort of what people describe as kind of perimeterless security or the zero trust security, right? But there's a reason why zero trust hasn't dominated the world, right? Like it's an obviously correct way to reason about the systems, right? Like being able to have something where you can construct a service identity and every action is being driven through the lens of a specific service identity. And realistically, the only organizations that have been able to make that transition to a kind of zero trust operating profile are organizations that have a fantastically heterogeneous internal workload, like Google, right? Like Google's been on the zero trust train. In fact, they pioneered the idea. The reality is real world enterprises are ooky, right? Like an organization has budget, and their budget is, being deployed to address their problems. And some of their budget is deployed to maintenance. Some of their budget is deployed to updating their technology fleet to be more modern. And some of their budget is being allocated to kind of forward-looking systems. The reality is that budget is never like entirely allocated to just deprecating older systems and moving things forwards, right? There's always a server under someone's desk that's running something it probably shouldn't. And the reality is, just given the conflicting priorities of real world organizations, that's going to continue to be the case. So, a lot of people talk about legacy systems. I tend to think of them as sort of heritage systems, this reality that those systems actually represent your organization in a very real way. In an organization is people, process, and technology. They are, in many ways, the technology that they've written over the last 20 years. And unfortunately, the technology that was written over the last 20 years has this, the crack cocaine addiction of API keys. It's not built around perimeter security. It's not built around, the use of a centralized IDP. It's not built around the idea of agentic identity. So the way I describe it is, it's going to get better. Like I think the world's going to get certainly as these types of systems challenge conventional design, as we start to see richness evolving, there will be classes of systems that do get better, and we no longer have the API key. But until that last database is rolled out, and until that last WinForms application is deprecated, and until that last mainframe is no longer sort of sitting there and crushing kind of a lot of the sort of ERP problems that your organization have, I think we're going to be living in this very yes and world. Yes, and yes, we'll have API keys. Yes, we'll have IDPs. Yes, we'll have sort of agentic zero trust. Yes, we'll have a whole bunch of other things. But if anything is I've learned over the last 25 years of working in the space is enterprises are complex and heterogeneous, and there's just no one solution for them.
In terms of the broader ecosystem, do you think this the slowness that comes with being a big company is going to be a detriment and allow startups to kind of start taking over more and more market share? Or do you view it more that the large budgets that come with having these big corporations, so they're able to run more experiments, try out different ways of leveraging AI, is going to keep them ahead? How do you see kind of the market share of the economy changing with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's these moments we've defined our, if you look back on humanity, our epochs are defined after the dominating technology: the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Industrial Age, right? And there's no question that we're now moving into the AI age, and it represents a tremendously disruptive moment that's going to change everything, right? Like it's going to change the unit economics associated with work. It's going to change the types and classes of goods that we can produce and market, right? So I don't think there's any question that this represents a moment of profound and fundamental disruption to almost every facet of industry. And it's breaking faster than any of the other technologies I think we've ever encountered, right? So this is the moment when there will be a massive redistribution of IT spend, of IT budget, of spend across the industry, right? Like it does represent a moment where organizations that are relatively unencumbered will have opportunities to create new classes of systems and new classes of service and new classes of product that will enable them to outperform their competitors. In terms of reading the crystal ball and saying how's that going to play out? Like, are we going to see new banks displace JPMC from their pedestal as the preeminent financial services institution? Probably not, right? Because there are, a lot of real world implications. And I think, some of these large organizations are going to move very authoritatively in this direction. But I do think it does represent a moment of substantial disruption, and organizations that are able to navigate the complexities of their regulatory or kind of complex operating environment to start accessing these tools to fundamentally change the cost profile of their ability to work are going to start to outperform. And I think we will see a new generation of breakout companies on the back of this. The Amazons, the Googles, that came out of the sort of .com era, right? That became the sort of these sort of megaliths of technology. We will see a new kind of wave of companies like that start to emerge. But yeah, I don't think it's obvious that it's a complete reset of the corporate landscape. I think there's opportunities for really great big companies to start to emerge. I think some of the great big companies we have will become, will go the path of GE, where they're unable to necessarily translate what they've been doing into this kind of new world. And I think, the cost economics across a lot of different areas are going to change, and folks that have been able to dominate in things like Red Hat's dominated the world of open source delivery for the last, number of years, because they have a very nuanced way of approaching open source communities and operationalizing, et cetera. Guess what? The cost economics of operationalizing open source just changed completely. And, Red Hat will either need to adjust to those realities and probably will, or someone else will start to, sort of show up and be able to kind of chip away at their dominance in certain areas, whether it's in the OS or in any of the other peripheral areas that they're operating in. So it is a period of opportunity. It's a period of tremendous change. And it certainly is an exciting time to be a startup because, when you're in a disruptive environment where the cost economics are changing, not being tied to an existing sales motion, not being tied to an existing support motion gives you just tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, and on top of being the most exciting, it's the most accessible. People can fire up a proof of concept at home relatively easily. You have access to all of these intelligence tools that can help you get up to speed and try to identify blind spots.
Yeah.
You mentioned open source, and that's my go-to, so I have to double click on that. You have StackLok and ToolHive running open source. What was the business decision that drove that?
For me, there's a couple of points here. Reality that when you're building a business, I'll kind of play it through two angles, right? Like, people say people say product market fit. And for me, that really means simple, repeatable sale. And, as we're starting to look at this ecosystem, there's a lot of folks moving really quickly, and open source is probably like one of the best enablers for an organization to move very quickly. Like, you don't have to have a conversation with someone to use their product. They don't have to have any commitment to you to use your product. They don't have to give you their email address to use your product. So it is by far the cleanest and simplest way to capture an organization's attention, and for you to be able to then, start to create value for someone that you don't even have a relationship with, right? So for me, like, that sort of simple, repeatable sale, like, you have it when people are just using your technology, and you're giving up something, right? Like, you're giving up control, you're giving up a competitive advantage in some ways, because one of the greatest compliments of open source is having another organization behind the scenes take what you build, package it up, and sell it. Like, there's nothing stopping them doing it, right? So your R&D is now something that your R&D budget is something that they can tap into. And so for me, the calculus is relatively simple. Like, one is, I want to see what works, and open source is a great way to do that. Two is, I've built technologies like Kubernetes in the past, and I've recognized the power of open source, not just as a way to, kind of unlock usage, but also as a way to start driving collaboration, right? Like, there's a lot of people out there that are looking to solve these problems, but approaching this with an open source mindset and enabling an open contributor model where it's like, I don't have to own all of this. Like, I would be perfectly happy with someone from Red Hat showing up, or someone from Microsoft showing up, or Google showing up, or anyone showing up, and starting to take ownership for the project. So it's that sort of, if you want to go fast, go alone. And, I'm happy to go alone in single vendor open source for a while. But if you want to go far, go together, and sort of community owned open source. If we want ToolHive to eventually emerge as a platform, you kind of need to let your Legos go a little bit, and let other people feel ownership of what you're doing. And then it's up to you to figure out how to create enough value beyond the community-centric open source to generate a healthy and sustainable business. And the good news is there's so many obvious ways to do that in this ecosystem. Like, every time I talk to an enterprise organization, there's 4 or 5 things that they're very upfront, and they would say, these are important to us, and yes, we pay money for them. And so you can start to use that open source as a way to kind of create enterprise-specific features that you can charge money for, whether those are open source themselves, or whether the organization just needs someone on the line to support the use of it.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it improves trust in the product. Like you said, you'll get product market fit quicker because you have real people using it. One aspect that's become more popular too is the idea of solutions engineering, where you actually have employees, staff who are able to integrate systems better. Do you see that proliferating to more industries where this idea of having multiple systems talk to each other is going to become more important? Or do you think that will be an area where AI thrives and we don't even need to start exploring that one in the human domain?
Yeah, I think there's, it's interesting. And it comes back to that earlier comment around, like, cost economics of integration, right? Like, when you think about where value creation is happening in the ecosystem right now, right? Like, most of the value creation that's happening, like, and I think of these sort of 2 areas that value creation is happening. Value creation happens in solution engineering. Value creation happens in kind of platform engineering, right? So it's like, I deliver a platform and it creates a certain amount of value because everyone can use the platform. And then there's the solutions engineering space where I create a solution using that platform. And, as I'm using the platform, I fit it to a specific use case. I fit it to a specific area. I think the thing that surprised me about the AI space is most of the value creation, and like this has been completely contrary to my own instincts. Like, I'm a platform engineer, so like I've always kind of just taken a platform first approach to things. And I think, what we're starting to see in the AI ecosystem is most of the value creation is actually happening in the solution engineering space. That if you start to approach a problem with platform engineer's mindset and start to try to a priori identify the set of things that need to exist for the system to function, like I need a vector database, I'm going to use this inferencing subsystem, I need this kind of connector, I need these things. And you start from that perspective and then try to figure out eventually how to actually build a solution on top of it. You will fail, right? It won't deliver the goods. Things are moving so quickly under the covers. If you've made a bet on one model, 3 months down the line, you're going to have a different model available. And so I think there is an inversion here where for an organization to succeed, they have to be able to embrace a solutions engineering mindset. They need to be able to move very quickly to feel what works. And then once they figured out what works, they need to figure out what platform enables them to start to unlock that value. And I do think we will see full platforms emerging. We will see this kind of agentic middleware start to emerge over time. But it's going to be companies like Google and Microsoft and, potentially Amazon and OpenAI and those types of organizations that actually have the wherewithal to create that kind of full soup to the nuts middleware type systems. And so I think it's premature for an organization to kind of embrace a full platform builder mindset and start to think of like, what is the Kubernetes for agentic, sort of workflows. So I do think, embracing tools that enable you to safely solutioneer is probably the most pragmatic thing an organization can do right now. And, once you start to identify what works, not just once, but, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and once you've started to get a handle on your organization's ability to consume these types of systems, that's the moment at which you start to ask questions around what platform is necessary for me to bring this into a production context. How do I deal with the illities, the security, the reliability, the manageability, the observability associated with the system? I don't know if that answers the question the way you were asking it, but that's something I've been thinking a lot about recently.
Along the same vein, the switch from going from platform engineering to solution engineering mindset. Do you have any other advice for people on what mindset they should try to be cognizant of, if not fully adopt, in order to thrive in this new AI age?
Yeah, I think this has been kind of, I've eaten a lot of humble pie over the last 6 months. I'll be honest, right? Like, I've been kind of, the way that I've personally operated is you sort of build this relatively sophisticated model of how the world works, and then you kind of will something to come into existence by your mental model of how the world works, right? Like that's how we built Google Compute Engine and Kubernetes and a variety of other things that I've worked on. And I've been wrong more often than I've been right when I'm interacting with AI systems because my instincts are wrong, right? Like you think like, and don't fall into this trap of thinking that you spend a bunch of time, you've watched the Carpathy series, you've got this sort of model in your mind around like, what the various, constituent pieces are. And now you feel qualified to assert what's going to work. Like probably going to be wrong. At least I've been wrong consistently. There's a lot of things that have happened that I just didn't see coming. I didn't understand. 20 years of experience building, enterprise class distributed systems just didn't translate well into this world. And so I think the reason we're seeing organizations like Cursor outperform in the space is because they come completely unfettered. They have these are individuals that are incredibly bright. They're incredibly close to the tools. And they're not making assumptions. They're not limiting their thinking based on their understanding around how the world and distributed systems tend to work, right? And so, the thing I would say is, and I've heard this from a lot of people I've talked to recently, is like, there's a person I sort of did breakfast with the other day who's an incredibly smart guy. Like he's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, one of the most organized people I've ever worked with. And he described a situation where they set up 3 teams to go and tackle a problem because they were struggling to address it. And the team that nailed it were the youngest, most freewheeling YOLO team they had. Like they couldn't use the solution they produced because, it was relatively, it wasn't necessarily at the sort of production ready, but that was the team that created the most inspiration for the system they eventually did build. And so I think you have to be very deliberate about not like this sort of, hey, I can see it working, that's fine. It's like, no, I have to see it working, actually read its results, play with it, optimize, just not necessarily in the traditional systems engineering way. Just try 5 different prompt profiles. Like, hey, what else can we do? Can we run, some kind of, once we start seeing this thing work, can we actually feed the results back in and see if it can self-optimize? Like, you have to hold on to that experimental kind of playful approach to technology a lot longer than you think you would, because it's so easy to start to converge on a local optima for the class of system that's being built.
That's phenomenal advice. Last question for me. What are some real world use cases for MCP that you've seen that have a lot of potential moving forward? Or what do you use in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, so I mean, what I use, I'm starting to use MCP for pretty much everything. So like I'll give you a couple of examples of things that we've done recently. We built a system that indexes all of our internal documentation. It indexes all of our Discord traffic. It indexes our GitHub repos, and it basically has built a semantic engine that now enables me to, during my day-to-day task, just ask questions. I can pick whichever model I want, and so we call it the StackLok knowledge circle, right? And it's basically just a robust knowledge base that gives me access to everything, and it gets integrated into the tools that I'm using all the time. And we just built a lightweight chat interface on top of it because it's convenient to be able to just go to a web page and ask questions about everything. When we started looking at telemetry, we've built MCP servers that enable me to start, asking questions around like, what are we actually seeing out there? Which regions are we seeing use around? Like being able to process time series telemetry data from things like the update service that we sort of offer, which is basically, it's completely anonymized. We're not getting any information about what a person's doing. We just see where things are that are requesting updates to the underlying subsystem. And so, being able to start just unlocking this world where I'm changing how I work, where I used to work by context shifting between a whole bunch of different tools. Now I'm able to go to a single tool, and rather than kind of, trying to go to a different SaaS tool to ask a question, I just go to one space, pick which tools I want to use. I can then ask the question in natural language and get synthesized results. So the thing that, like, the promise of this is a fundamental change to how we work, right? It used to be like, gosh, I don't even know how many SaaS applications I touch on a day-to-day basis. If I'm interviewing a candidate, I go to a bunch of SaaS applications. If I'm trying to reason about what's happening in the community, I go to a bunch of different SaaS applications. If between GitHub and Discord and Google Drive, etc. So this shifted attention that's happening in my day-to-day life towards this kind of centralized AI workbench where the data is being brought to me, not me going to the data, right? Like the SaaS systems become the system of record in the backends, and the MCP servers become the gateway for me to be able to access data that can then be joined with other data that's relevant so that I can ask questions about, what community issues are we seeing, and have those issues affected our, our ability to, let me give you a better example. Like, what campaigns have we run from a marketing perspective, and how are those campaigns now actually affecting our observable usage or access to our web properties or all of these other things. So, my team is going through the exercise of taking this AI maximalist mindset, looking at all the things we use, and then asking the question, like, how do I make those accessible to this kind of AI workbench? Like, how do the developers get that in Cursor, like as part of their daily life? How do I get that in whatever kind of environment that makes sense for me, since I don't write a lot of code every day? And that's changing how I work, and I think it's going to change how everyone works over time.
Love it. Excellent. Craig, I really appreciate you coming on. This was an awesome chat. Really think more people should try ToolHive and just put more thought into security, as well as just see how they can leverage MCP to change the way they work. Before I let you go, where can people catch up on what StackLok is doing? How can they get involved or test out ToolHive? Where should people go?
You can go to toolhive.dev. We love to see people in the Discord community. So if you go to toolhive.dev, you can find the GitHub profile. You can download the tool and try it yourself on your local machine. Or if you want to just jump on the Discord server, say hi, and we'd love to chat to you.
I'm in the Discord and it's a friendly group, so encourage everyone to go there. Craig, thanks again. Take care. Thank you for joining for my conversation with Craig McLuckie. I always have a great time talking to Craig, and I really wanted you to get an understanding of the importance of security in this day and age. With AI agents running around and people vibe coding up apps, security is really taking a back seat, and that's kind of dangerous. So using a tool like ToolHive, which I really recommend you check out, is a great step in the right direction. It's free and it's open source. Check it out on GitHub. Join the StackLok Discord. I'm there. You can come say hi. But let's make sure that this next phase of development, as we continue to accelerate, includes a focus on security. So thank you for joining, and I'll see you next week.